us once again is Cleo, Senior Fellow at the Foundation for the Defense of Democracy.
Now, somebody has to do it.
Democracies? There's more than one?
Democracy.
They keep coming out with new ones.
You can't keep track of all the democracies.
Does it include China's democracy? Because China has the best democracy.
It's a special democracy. Yeah, right.
It's not as chaotic as our democracy. It's very stable.
None of that stupid voting stuff.
Yeah.
Oh, there's voting on the local level that's completely representative of China's shift towards democracy. I've been bought off.
Yeah, there you go.
It's that old one man, one vote, and that one man is she, right?
Yeah, there we go.
That's all you need. One vote. Well, today we wanted to talk about entropic warfare, China's entropic warfare. So why is China waging war in the tropics?
Yeah, so I have gotten this a few times. I have to figure out how to explain this better. So entropy, right? The state of entropy is when something slowly falls apart, disintegrates, enters a state of chaos. And that seems to be what China tries to do in countries where it hasn't had effective elite capture. So the goal, first of all, would be elite capture. Then you don't have to. Then your elite, your proxy elite, manage the population on your behalf. That's a lot easier. So that would be, buy off somebody I wouldn't use any examples from this continent for fear of concern.
Hun Sen, Cambodia.
Yeah, okay, fine. And then they do your dirty work for you. Okay, that would be ideal. If that doesn't work and there's some resistance and it's a functioning democracy, what you can do is try to create chaos, dissension, division within the society so that it weakens. And you can come in a much more focused way, usually identify groupings within that now disintegrating society that you can back and that can take control, and you can then have your effective elite capture to ride roughshod over the rest of the population.
So this state of entropy you're talking about, is this one of those democracies?
There
you go.
The goal, what is the ultimate goal of the Chinese Communist Party, right, in international affairs? And we've talked about this before. It's to be number one in terms of comprehensive national power. So the China, in comparison to other countries, has more strength. But it's also to create effective vassal states, right? And we can see how quickly that can happen in a place like the Solomon Islands. So in 2019, Solomon's was in a very perfectly fine operating relationship with Taiwan. And it wasn't completely stable, but it was pretty stable. Then it switched to China. And you started to see all of these unrestricted warfare tactics come into play to create a state of entropy. They bought off 39 out of the 50 members of parliament. And we have the list of names of who got money directly from the Chinese slush fund. And that was enough members of parliament, plus one or two, in order to be able to change the constitution and postpone elections, which they've now done. They also created so much dissension with the other province, Malaita, which didn't want to switch to China, wanted to stay with Taiwan, that it started to reignite the sort of sentiments that had previously led to a civil war. And there was so much dissatisfaction with this Chinese coming in hard and mean, including illegal logging and all sorts of other activities, that you got the riots in the capital that were then, it seems like, directed towards Chinatown, and the Chinatown in the capital of Solomon Islands was burnt down. So that first phase happened very quickly in about a year and a half, and that created the justification ultimately to sign a security deal between Prime Minister Sogavare, who is that Chinese proxy, and the Chinese state, which would allow the deployment of Chinese forces to come into the Solomons to protect Chinese investments and Chinese citizens, things that weren't at threat when the relationship was with Taiwan. But they created such destabilization that they could justify the insertion of troops in order to protect Chinese citizens and Chinese investments.
So basically the CCP was happy that Chinatown was burned because that just gave them an excuse to send in the troops.
Yeah. I mean, so
Well, technically, they haven't sent in the troops.
But they've done a lot of police training and they've sent in a lot of weaponry, and the logic is there to be accepted by the West. This is a responsibility to protect type of situation, right? So there are some people in the Solomons say, first of all, the riot was triggered. So they're mostly peaceful protests, and then the police fired tear gas into the protesters, and then there was looting, obviously. But this kind of kettling or moving the population that was rioting towards the Chinatown may have been part of, not accidental, and Chinatown wasn't defended. We know that for sure. And the population very quickly, within the next 2 or 3 days, came out on the streets to clean up Chinatown in the city and to return, angry mothers getting their teenage kids to return what they looted and things like it was trying to self-correct. But what happened was Sogavare asked the Australians to intervene.
Right, but the Prime Minister Sogavare.
Prime Minister Sogavare, who's a Chinese proxy, asked the Australians to intervene. And the Australians sent in troops. And so Sogavare could turn to the members of parliament and say, I've got China on my side and I have Australia on my side. Do you really want to try to get rid of me now? And then once the Australians had sent in the troops, the Chinese had a justification to send in their own troops because there were already foreign troops on the ground. Okay? So using the Australian cover to increase the Chinese presence was a really nice move, very clever move. And I honestly don't think it was accidental. I think that the Australians were really played.
Well, so now that Australia has sent, semi-automatic weapons to the Solomon Islands, is that just an excuse for Chinese semi-automatic weapons to come in?
Well, they sent in, after Australia did that, China sent some water cannon trucks and other riot police type of vehicles in.
So this is all really recent, okay? So the excuse for moving the election or postponing the election was the Solomon Islands is supposed to host the Pacific Games in 2023, which is a regional Olympics. And Sogavare said, we don't have money for the games and for the elections that we are supposed to legally hold in 2023, so we're going to hold the games and we'll hold the elections at some other point. And then Australia stepped in and said, okay, don't worry about it. We'll help you fund the games. and then the international community went, what the hell are you doing, Australia? They said it quietly like that.
Well, the clear solution is then just China can fund the election.
So then after the international community said what it said, then Australia said, okay, maybe we'll help fund the election. But by then it was too late. Right?
They'd already postponed it?
They'd already postponed it. Then Australia sent in, as you mentioned, very recently, 60 semi-automatic weapons and a dozen vehicles, right? And the opposition came out and said, who do you think they're going to use these guns against? I mean, it's not like Papua New Guinea is about to attack Solomon Islands.
This is like a small tropical island nation that's like,
yeah,
like they don't need like riot gear.
Well, I mean, semi-automatic weapons are a little beyond riot gear.
Yes.
Yeah, and the only people the government could be using it against is their own people, right? And there was a civil war that ended a little over 20 years ago. And one of the things that fueled that civil war was the militants raiding the armory of the police and getting weapons to use against the state. And then there was a big process at the end of the Civil War of getting all those weapons back and destroying them. And now you're doing it again. And then, exactly as you said, almost a day or two later, China announced this lovely gift of water cannons. So imagine you're a pro-democracy person in Solomons. Imagine you would like to stick with Taiwan. You're very concerned about the direction your government is going in. It's gotten rid of the elections. It's clearly bought off huge sections of the government. And all of these weapons and training are being poured in to Prime Minister Sogavare's regime. How scared are you?
And I think, like, from what we saw this is reminding me of Hong Kong a lot because of the escalation of like riot police and tear gas and water can, this kind of thing, where the more escalated the police came, like it was almost like they were trying to push the protesters toward more violence, and then you have this continuing escalation from both sides.
Yeah. And remember, this all happened since September 2019. This creation of this state of disintegration and internal chaos and potential for violence. And we can talk about the Australian piece of it, but the trajectory it's on now, it has the potential to trigger another civil war. And if that happens, then Sogavare knows he has China's backing. And that's why things like what happened with what Xi did to Hu Jintao, a guy like Sogavare looks at that with envy. He wishes he could take out the Prime Minister of Malta and drag him off a stage and have him disappear in the same way Xi did. It's not unattractive to potential dictators. So understanding, how that messaging can whether that was an intended consequence or not, understanding how the authoritarianism of the Chinese Communist Party can be attractive to people who have that kind of mindset and so want to create a civil war situation so they have an excuse not just to postpone elections, but to never have another election.
Mm-hmm. I guess in a lot of ways, this is kind of like Communism 101, that they, Marx talked about the forcible overthrow of all pre-existing social conditions. You go into society, you break down the pillars that support it, and in the ensuing chaos, you take over. That's how the Chinese Communist Party took over China.
That's how the Soviets took over Russia.
Yeah. And that's how I plan to take over the show.
And you're going to make Matt and I fight with each other?
Oh, you guys already got that taken care of. But yeah, so then...
You bring in some foreign influence.
There we go. Thanks for the semi-automatic guns, by the way.
You are a foreigner.
Yeah, I am. Yeah. Shh.
Yeah. Well, I think everyone can tell by the accent.
I don't know what you're talking about.
There we go. But yeah, so the Chinese Communist Party is just using these same communist tactics just in other countries that also want to become authoritarian dictatorships.
But have you considered that maybe Prime Minister Sogavare, you think of him as a dictator, but isn't he the hero of his own story?
Yeah. I mean, like Stalin was the hero of his own story and all, everybody. Right. Yeah. I think that's actually part of it is control of the media so that you can be the hero of the story. So if you can, and you get a lot of, that's part of this creation of a state of entropy. So when Wang Yi went through the Pacific Islands, people like Sogavare limited what their own country's press could report and what access they could have. And so that security deal that was signed, we only know what was in it because a draft of it was leaked. So control over narrative actually is an incredibly important component of it. And if the journalists object to it, that just contributes to the state of entropy, to this sense of division within the society. So if your goal is to create chaos, all of this is just fine. People getting killed, unions being angry, whatever, it's what you're talking about in terms of just whatever will work to create fractions, divisions, and just destruction of what was there before.